strange. Such a little thing.
Don't worry, we're almost there. You'll be able to look her up once we're on board. Sounds like you do have a lot of catching up to do.
Alright. We've still got a job to do. We're moving out.
There should be a security detail in here.
Yeah? Well, there's not. There's nobody here.
Isaac! Isaac! God, I can't believe you made it.
This is what we have been searching for all these years. This is what we have been waiting for. Don't listen to them!
The hell?
I don't know. Something's in the room with us.
Jesus! Open fire! Open fire!
Isaac, make us whole again.
So, it's actually happening. After constant speculation and fake news about a possible Dead Space 4 or remake being in the works for the past 5 years, we're actually getting a Dead Space remake, which was revealed at the most recent EA Play. To be honest, what we got wasn't a lot, but nonetheless it looked amazing. Not in terms of gameplay, because, well, there was no gameplay, so it's pretty hard to say how that'll turn out. This teaser mainly focused on the graphical leap we can see in the remake from the original, not to mention how great the sound design was. I'm sure I wasn't the only one who got chills after hearing that classic Dead Space health regen sound effect. Upon hearing the news of the remake, I'm sure everyone like myself had a mixture of reactions. For me, it was initial excitement, as I love the franchise, not all aspects, but overall. This was then followed by a sudden wave of sadness, after realising Visceral Games would not be behind its creation ever since they closed their doors for good. It's a shame they didn't get to be a part of this project, but there is some good news, as it was revealed that Glenn Schofield, creator/director of Dead Space, is working with a new team, Striking Distance Studios, on a new game that seems to be a spiritual successor to Dead Space. Hopefully it turns out to be a success for him. This eventual wave of sadness quickly grew into concern and doubt, however, as I began to realise who was spearheading the remake. EA has always been a mixed bag of trash and gold. Mostly trash though. It's like every year they try to come up with a new controversy, and although they haven't done much recently to upset people, it's almost a matter of time before they do, and I'm worried the Dead Space remake will be one of these slip-ups. To brace myself for its inevitable release, I decided to play the first game after not touching it for a few years. Seeing as how it came out all the way back in 2008, it's amazing how well the game still holds up even after all these years, which is all thanks to the hard work and dedication of the team responsible for the sound design, creature designs, atmosphere, and gameplay. Even now to this day, it is still arguably one of the scariest games available on the market. It's both impressive and alarming that most new horror games still can't capture fear and paranoia like this blood-covered shape-shifting gem. Its legacy and success has led it to become one of the most recognisable horror franchises, ranking amongst legends like Resident Evil and Silent Hill, spawning sequels, spin-offs, comics, and even 2 animated movies. All of this would not have been possible, however, if it was not for one of the most influential and innovative horror games for its time. Although Dead Space definitely took inspiration from other known video games and even films, it itself went on to set trends other games would follow. Given the game's ability to scare and engage players still to this day, is a remake really necessary? Although I do plan on talking about the problems the remake could cause, this video is mainly going to praise the original and discuss just how effective it is at being a horror game set in space. Some can agree that stories in horror video games usually aren't that important for a game's overall quality. They mostly act as simple setups to establish where the player will be, what they will be doing, and what they aim to achieve. Although it's not that uncommon to have a story-driven horror game, the main focus in this genre is to scare the player. Dead Space understands this and keeps the main plot pretty simple. You are Isaac Clarke, an engineer on his way to investigate the Ishimura, a ship out in deep space that has gone radio silent. It may seem at first that you're just there to do your job. However, Isaac has personal connections with the mission, as his girlfriend Nicole is somewhere on board the ship, and so soon enough it becomes a personal mission, not only to find out what happened to the ship, but what also happened to Nicole. This immediately creates a connection between the player and Isaac, as now he's not just some generic guy who's just doing his job, but someone who is caring and determined to find his lost love. Isaac in this game is portrayed as a silent protagonist, only ever making noises like grunts and moans when fighting enemies. You can also hear him breathing through his mask, which is a nice touch. This of course is to keep the player engaged in the world of the game and allow them to slip into the role of Isaac, as if they were there themselves. It's pretty interesting to see how much Isaac's character changes over the next couple of games, as although he doesn't speak in this one, in Dead Space 2 and 3, he doesn't shut the fuck up.
It's okay.
How you doing?
It's not a bad thing he talks in those games. It lets him be more human, actually talking with other characters, but I think that's a big reason those games aren't as effective as the original. Isaac being silent means there are no distractions for the player to get lost in, as they in a sense are Isaac, just like how players take on the roles of other silent or faceless protagonists in other games. However, the fact that Isaac does talk in the sequels means the player doesn't really feel like that anymore. Instead of being there, they feel like an observer. It's not a major issue of course, I mean if anything it's just a nitpick, as I still love the second game too, but I feel this is why the original is so much more scary. No quips, no cheesy one-liners, just you versus a ship filled with crazy people and an army of the dead. The plot starts to thicken naturally as you progress through the game, unravelling just what caused the Ishimura to fall in the first place. The overall story is mainly told through the environments themselves, as you can see visually how the crew began to lose their minds. The game also uses audio and text logs you can pick up that give you insight into some of the individuals inhabiting the ship before its demise.
In the body. You gotta cut off the limbs. Grab a cutter, anything like that. Cut them apart!
Now story items in games are nothing new, as many games use this feature to help with the world building and flush out parts of their story. Some people may argue that these features just aren't that important, but in Dead Space, I believe they're an excellent addition to the story and the horror atmosphere. The recordings you pick up are often extremely eerie, conveying emotions of panic, sadness and regret. It's even more creepy when you start to realise that these recordings are most likely taken moments before the individual's death.
Tommy, we never should have let him live. Shut up, Danvers! Help me with the tools. Temple out.
The word uniontologist gets thrown around constantly, which starts to get a bit confusing as you don't really understand it yet, until it eventually comes full circle and you realise that the outbreak pretty much started due to a religious cult's obsession with a certain artifact that is responsible for unleashing the monsters you encounter. Damn religious cults, always starting shit. This twist makes the premise a lot more terrifying, as it shows some of the crew members on board the Ishimura and the ones who sent the ship to the place where the marker was found knew what the risks were, but still wanted to achieve their goal, even if it meant sacrificing the entire crew on board. This religious relic is known as the marker, and is revealed to have been brought up from the planet's surface, as the Ishimura was sent to mine the planet, or planet crack should I say. Isaac's mission to repair the ship soon becomes a deluded pipe dream, and Isaac takes it upon himself to send the marker back to where it came from.
Put that thing back where it came from, also help me.
Since I brought up Isaac, I think it's appropriate we talk about the many other faces you come across during the game. Not the cold, dead and rotting ones though, just the actual people. Isaac's not alone on his mission to the Ishimura. He's joined by Kendra, Hammond and Red Shirts 1 and 2. Hammond and Kendra, especially Kendra, are given important roles in the game, as they pretty much tell Isaac what to do to fix the Ishimura, acting like his guides in a way as he traverses the ship. They do this by talking to you via Zoom, I mean Discord, I mean with your rig, popping up in front of you and sometimes scaring you in the process.
Isaac, are you there?
Or maybe that's just me. This goes to show just how tense the atmosphere in the game is, when even a harmless little video projection scares you. Kendra is not just used in the story to push the plot forward. No. She is also the twist villain. This comes off quite a surprise, as throughout the game you believe Hammond may be involved in the infection somehow, as Kendra constantly criticises his decision making, giving you the false impression that Kendra is ultimately on your side, when in reality she was only ever on her own. Poor Hammond, may he rest in peace, or rather, pieces. These are not the only people you will encounter however, as you also meet Dr. Kane, the man who informs you of the solution to the infection, and Dr. Weller, a scientist who has the genius idea of experimenting on the necromorphs, and is responsible for the creation of arguably one of the most terrifying enemies in the game. Two scientists on the opposite sides of the spectrum, but both equally insane and unhinged. Now that we've got that lot out of the way, I think it's time we talk about arguably one of the most, if not the most important side character in the game, Nicole. As I briefly brought up earlier, Isaac is trying to find Nicole, all the while fixing the ship she is lost on. During the game, Nicole will interrupt your comm channel in a desperate attempt to get your attention.
Isaac, where are you? Help me!
This pushes you forward to continue your search for her, no matter how harrowing it may be. Each time you complete a chapter, you think you're getting closer and closer to her, but after a while, something seems wrong. The game leaves several hints that Nicole isn't the same as she was before the incident on board the Ishimura. In fact, you even run into her a couple of times in the flesh during the final chapters of the game, but she seems to appear out of thin air. Nothing seems to be adding up, until it's revealed by Kendra, who has betrayed you at this point, that Nicole had been dead the entire time, even before Isaac and the crew arrived to the ship, making it feel like the entire journey you went through was all for nothing. It's revealed throughout the game that many of the crew on board the Ishimura began to suffer with dementia and began seeing things that weren't real thanks to the marker, which unfortunately is revealed to have been happening to Isaac the entire time. This is such a bleak twist, but arguably a very effective one. A twist should always shock the player but also make sense in terms of the story. This strikes a perfect balance between the two and makes sense within the world of the game, as if the marker messed with the crew, it would obviously mess with Isaac as well. This for me is why Nicole has such a strong and impactful place in Dead Space, as she encapsulates a lot of what makes this game so terrifying. If those sounds didn't freak you out, I don't know what will. Sometimes it's not just the music that scares the player, as ambience and background noise can be very useful in heightening the atmosphere for the player. Sometimes all it takes is noise. No enemies, no shocking sights, no jump scares, just noise. And already the player can be terrified without even seeing anything remotely scary. Dead Space has some of the creepiest and unnerving ambience I've ever heard in a video game, which given the themes of the game is a great achievement. It would be a completely different story if the game was about puppies and kittens though. The hard work and dedication of the sound design team can be seen, or rather heard, throughout the game. Every noise feels deliberate and purposeful, things that shouldn't even be scary.
Watering cycle initiated.
Sound scary, and that's great. All of these noises gradually put pressure on the player mentally, making them jumpier and jumpier as they anticipate a scare. Steam bursting out of pipes, electricals zapping. Sometimes the sound becomes so overwhelming it's hard to concentrate on your surroundings and listen out for any enemies that could be forming around you. Sound in a game like this is key to keeping the player scared, but at the same time, engaged. Sounds are so great as they send the player's mind racing as to what could be making them. The echoes of pained screams, the beastly roars of unseen enemies, and scratching through the vents is enough to send you in full panic mode. It gives a lot of scale to the ship hearing these distant sounds, and it makes you think that there are other characters struggling for survival in this situation but ultimately fail. Does anyone else feel like the store screen in particular is trying to say something? Sound is also used to make our boy Isaac seem more relatable. In most games when you take damage, the character you control doesn't make noise of any kind. This is usually to make them seem unfazed by the situation and keep the player feeling powerful. When Isaac gets hurt however, you'll know about it, as he lets out pained groans when hit by anything. This also occurs when he hits or stamps on something, as he almost lets out a frustrated and strained yell. Another fantastic addition to Isaac's character is that when you are put in a stressful situation, you can hear his heartbeat racing. This again brings Isaac down to the player's level. He's not just some jumped up super soldier or action hero, he's just a regular guy trying to do his job, and he's absolutely terrified the entire time. And so are we. There's one additional sound design choice that completely nails this game's position as one of the greatest horror games for me. Not a necessary addition by any means, but it totally adds to the game's overall themes. Throughout the game, you can hear faint whispering in your ears.
Search and rescue. After graduating, she took a security management position with CEC at their space vessel assembly plant. Gothia's paternal grandparents reside in the populous hubs of North Carolina.
This follows you around for most of the game, and is obviously meant to reflect the marker's influence on making people crazy, and acts as an early hint that the marker has made its way into the head of Isaac. So there isn't much to say about the actual music in the game, which makes it sound bad, but it really isn't. Music in this game is very minimal, and is mainly used to heighten stressful situations with things like stingers and sudden loud crashing instruments. Very simple, very effective. Of course there is one song from this game that everyone remembers, and that's the creepy rendition of heard throughout the promotional material for the game, and it can also be heard several times throughout the game itself, creating a somewhat depressing undertone. Overall, the sound of Dead Space is some of the best I've ever heard in a game. A famous movie poster once said, "In space, no one can hear you scream," but unfortunately, on board the Ishimura, that isn't the case. Partnered with the sound, the visual design of this game is truly something to behold. Despite being released all the way back in 2008, the graphics still hold up, allowing you to take in every vile inch of the interior of the ship. Let's start with the Ishimura itself. It definitely feels like the devs took heavy inspiration from the Alien franchise. Long, narrow corridors, flashing orange lights, and heavy machinery are all present in the game, and it's easy to see why, as these aspects of the design add to the game's horror. These narrow corridors give anyone with claustrophobia a panic attack, me amongst them, as it becomes increasingly distressing when enemies begin to pop out of vents and crevices. As briefly mentioned earlier, the visuals in the game are used to convey to the player what happened on board the ship. Mad ramblings and scribbles can be seen covering a lot of the surfaces in the game, conveying a sense of madness and hopelessness. Oftentimes these are written in blood, painting several unsettling images inside the player's mind. Blood, of course, is everywhere in the game, sprayed up walls and dripping from the ceiling. Couple that with the claw marks and severely damaged interior, and you start to see the danger these creatures actually pose to you in the game. Since the ship is in such a state, most of the electronics are faulty or broken. The wrecked and twisted design of the ship is a great setting for a game like this. The player is pretty much trapped by themselves in the middle of space with little to no help against an army seeking to kill him, or worse. Now, I've mentioned them a couple of times throughout the video, but now I think it's time we take a closer look at the enemies of the game. In short, they're fucking freaky. Each enemy is designed to fit a different role in the game and style of attack. All of them share one thing, however: body mutilation. Almost every enemy is beyond recognition of ever being human. Their skin is torn and stretched, barely covering what lies inside, and large bony fragments have pierced their arms, turning them into living razor blades, which is a shame for poor Isaac. Not all of them, like I said, look the same. The Divider, for example, is a tall, lanky enemy that lets out blood-curdling wails when you get close to it, and as the name implies, can divide its body when it's attacked. Infector, again, says what it does on the tin: small, nimble necromorphs that infect corpses and turn them into fresh necromorphs. One of my other favourite designs, by that I mean it scared the shit out of me, is the Twitcher, a special type of necromorph in the sense that it runs extremely fast thanks to its host being merged with a status module, allowing it to reach incredible speeds, closing down the gap between you and it in a matter of seconds. These and many other designs are all extremely memorable and leave a lasting impression on the player. The developers definitely went the extra mile when creating these monsters. They could have gone the easy route and just made shambling corpses with grey skin and blood dripping from their jaws, or even aliens, but they wanted their enemies to be intimidating and hard to look at. And it's not just the enemies themselves that are unique from each other. Each enemy has a unique death animation when killing Isaac. Speaking of Isaac again, his design is pretty striking. Most protagonists in games where you fight waves upon waves of enemies usually have some sort of armour that protects them from damage, but what's interesting about Isaac is that what he is wearing is not particularly powerful, and rather just his work clothes. Nevertheless, his design is badass. With a neon blue visor and bronze coated armour, guess the poor guy couldn't afford the silver or gold editions. Maybe they'll be available in the remake as microtransactions. Wouldn't put it past EA. The gameplay of a game arguably has to be adapted from its genre and setting. This allows the devs to come up with meaningful and interesting gimmicks that make the gameplay feel unique from other games. Dead Space, in my opinion, does a great job at executing this and offers some unique forms of gameplay that feel natural within the setting of the game itself. First and foremost, this is a survival horror game, as you have to rely on weapons, credits, ammo, and health you find on board the Ishimura and other areas in the game. These items can often be found in crates, small compartments, or by beating the piss out of dead necromorph bodies. The plasma cutter, or Old Reliable as I call it, is the weapon you start off with. Once a tool, now turned dismemberer, this will be your best friend in the early stages of the game until you find other weapon schematics and upgrade your arsenal. These weapons have to be purchased, however, which can be done via the store, where you can also buy health packs, ammo, and new suits for Isaac to wear that increases inventory space. As is with survival horror games, these items are key to your survival, and you must try to not be too wasteful with them. Even though ammo is somewhat easy to obtain, it's also very easy to burn through it. Necromorphs don't go down without a fight. In fact, the only real way to kill them is aiming for their limbs, immobilizing them and cutting off their weapons. Each necromorph in the game serves a unique purpose in terms of ways to kill you. Some prefer a head-on approach, whilst others try to kill Isaac from a distance. Due to this, some weapons are a lot more effective on certain enemies than others. Even this isn't enough to put them down sometimes, however, and so the player is equipped with a melee and stomp action that allows you to crush parts of a corpse, preventing them from coming back. If you come across a room full of dead bodies, sometimes it's best to turn them into mush, so an infector can't convert them into necromorphs. Eventually, as you progress throughout the game, the enemies become tougher and tougher to put down. Luckily, there are upgrade stations you can use to upgrade your weapons and armour, or rig as it's called in the game, allowing Isaac to take additional oxygen into space, grant him extra health, extra damage, capacity and reload speed for your weaponry. These upgrades have to be purchased with power nodes, somewhat rare objects that can be found hidden in small purple boxes nailed to walls. It's interesting to see how the AI in this game behaves. Usually rooms and corridors where you're expecting enemies are empty. Only when you have been in that area for a certain amount of time will enemies begin to attack you, bursting out of vents. This creates panic within the player, as once they suspect an enemy is around a corner, only to be met with a dark, quiet, empty space, the player frantically begins to look around themselves, just in case something is lurking behind them. This is such a great way of keeping the player's attention on the game, as they can never fully let their guard down. This even goes for safe zones. I say it like that because nowhere's safe on this ship, it feels like. Some areas where you backtrack through where enemies weren't present at first will most likely now have enemies waiting there for you, giving you a false sense of security, even in places like elevators. It's again a great way to subvert the player's expectations. Most survival horror games offer the player safe places to save their game and take a breather, like Resident Evil. With Dead Space, you can't trust anything, and that's good. It really keeps you on the edge of your seat. As mentioned in the story section of the video, Isaac's initial objective is to fix the ship. This puts the player in specific situations in order to repair it. As expected on board a damaged spaceship, gravity won't be completely perfect. Some parts of the game require Isaac to enter zero gravity locations to progress through the game. Movement can be a little disorientating at first, as the player gains the ability to perform long jumps and can stick to most surfaces with ease. These areas are usually where puzzles are found, as a player must traverse these locations and search for either items to find or electricals to repair or deactivate. Another useful tool that works its way into the gameplay of Dead Space is stasis. Stasis allows the player to momentarily slow down enemies, giving the player some much needed breathing room, and also sometimes it can be used on parts of the environment itself, making it a crucial tool at your disposal. Having the job of being an engineer also means that you have to do a lot of heavy lifting. Luckily for Isaac, he has another tool that can help him with this: Kinesis. Kinesis grants the player the ability to pick up items in the environment, like power cores needed for doors, explosive cans and blades that the player can then use instead of their actual weapons to conserve ammo. None of these tools ever feel wasted. They are all integral to your survival and blend themselves into the core gameplay nicely. Another interesting choice for the gameplay itself is that there is no heads-up display present on the player's screen, no ammo count, no minimap, and no health bar. These things are not completely exempt from the game though, as they are present in different forms. The player's health is visible on Isaac's back, being represented by a long blue light going up the player's spine, switching to yellow when half health, then turning red when you are very low on health or nearly dead. In order to see the ammo count for your weapons, you have to physically aim them. Either that or you can open your inventory and check, but one of these is clearly much faster. Given the fact that a dark, narrow and winding ship can be quite disorientating, the player has access to a map that shows them where their current objectives are. The devs were even kind enough to give the player a wayfinder that leads them to where they need to go. These gameplay choices arguably add to the overall experience. The devs understood that the player needed to focus on what was happening on screen, so having that be covered in a HUD would kind of divide their attention. It also makes the player feel that little more vulnerable, as typically in FPS games, the player is given an in-depth HUD that shows them important information like health and ammo, so it makes the experience that little more challenging and almost more realistic, as much as a game about morphing undead monsters can be considered realistic. Dead Space for me has continued to be terrifying this whole time. Despite the franchise as a whole losing steam, it can't be denied that the original raised the bar in terms of immersion and genuine horror. The game manages to capture the stuff of nightmares through its striking visuals and powerful sound design. Many games have tried to capture this same sense of dread in outer space, and very few have come even close. I just want to say that by no means am I against the upcoming remake. As I mentioned earlier, I'm quite excited, but surely people must realise that this could go very wrong wrong if EA don't handle it properly. The reason the original was so successful is because the lead director made a game that was his with little to no input from anyone else. This can be seen by its clear vision, structure and execution. Given EA's involvement in making Dead Space 3 and the absolute mess that turned out to be, it should really come to no surprise why I, and others, are so worried about this game. I'm almost certain some aspects will be changed in the game, so I'm prepared for that now, but I mean, who knows, maybe the game will be the best it's ever been. Things I'd personally like to see are perhaps some story expansions, maybe based on some of the audio logs Isaac can find. I think this is a pretty easy way to put in extra content. Other than that, nothing else should be changed about this legendary horror show. Oh, actually, maybe change the zero gravity running animation so it doesn't look like Isaac has shit himself.